here as our sign language interpreter, and if people could be careful to keep her in the picture, that would be great. It's part of our wider communication. I'd like to introduce Ken Gledhill from GNS Science, who's going to give us a bit of an update on the quake itself. Fran Wilde is going to give us an update on the public transport and on the port. And we also have Bruce Pepperell, Stavros, Michael and Sue Sholga, who will fill in any gaps or answer any questions if we can't.
Could we just make a request maybe to move a little bit closer together just for the microphones, because we'll struggle probably to hear anyone except for the mayor.
Or just swap seats maybe. See the microphones are there, whether we can swap seats, whoever's going through.
Well, I think we'll just, I think moving around will be a bit close enough. And Fran's got a good voice.
Yeah.
Project your voice.
Absolutely, we shall.
Thank you.
So first of all, we're going to have Ken give you a brief update, and then I'm going to give you an update on some of the conditions of the buildings and car parks and so forth in the city, and then we'll move to Fran. So first of all, over to you, Ken.
Okay, I'm assuming you love numbers for a start, so I'll cover those first. The probabilities were redone at lunchtime today, and they've come back a bit since the ones you would have seen last night, or maybe talked about earlier this morning. So the probability of a 6+ in the next day, next 24 hours, is now around 70%. It was much higher than that. And in the next week, about 90%, so 1 in 5 still, so significant. And in the next year, it's still at 39%. So the effect of a major earthquake like we've just had is to boost those numbers. Those numbers for Wellington aren't particularly low all the time, so that should be taken into account as well. Unlike the Canterbury region, an event like this is not a surprise. It's something that would happen every few decades. If you actually look at the historical record, there was a Seddon earthquake in 1966 that caused considerable damage. It was a bit closer to Seddon, although the location is not well known, but caused considerable damage on the other side of Cook Strait and not that much on this side of Cook Strait. And then you had the Ngangahua, which was further away but larger and caused quite a lot of damage in Wellington in 1968. So these things happen periodically. What we know about this series of earthquakes, and particularly the one last night, was that they're in the overlying Earth's crust. So you've probably seen me do this before. This is the Pacific plate and thrust down under the Australian plate. We all live on the Australian plate here, and they're all in the Australian plate. And so it's got to do with that sort of buckling process that goes on. Okay? The first two events, the one on Friday, I'm talking about bigger events, the one on Friday and the one on Sunday morning that woke me up, which I felt a little bit aggrieved about, they were thrusting events, so that's a pushing up kind of motion, if you like. The one last night was what we call strike slip, so that's the faults are sliding past each other. So what happens when you get something that maybe slides half a metre or more over a big area of more than 10 kilometres and with some depth, is you're going to strain all the areas around it. And so that's what we're seeing at the moment, is it's mainly controlled by the earthquakes that are sort of taking up that strain. The maximum kind of shaking that we had in Wellington was, the maximum on this side of Cook Strait in Wellington was in Karori, and was about 14% the force of gravity. Compare that with Christchurch, where the actual maximum was 2 times the force of gravity, and in the CBD in Christchurch, it was a little under 1 times the force of gravity. So that was a much more significant shake.
This was 40%?
No, 14.
14.
Sorry. The addiction, obviously. The maximum we recorded was at Ward on the other side of Cook Strait, which was 21%.
Where, sorry?
Ward?
Ward.
Ward, W-A-R-D.
It's a town near Seddon.
Yeah, it's a town near Seddon. So that's about all I've got at the moment. Unless there's questions.
I've got a
If
question.
you've got questions on that scientific analysis, feel free to answer.
I have questions. So there's a swarm of earthquakes in this location, which
Yes.
we've all been watching. I mean,
Yes.
and there's been hundreds of them. What it looks like. I mean, there seems to
Yeah.
be one every 15 seconds or something. I mean,
Yeah.
how normal is that?
That's very normal when you get... The first one on Friday set off its own aftershock sequence, and so, as I said, every time you get an earthquake, you get that readjustment that goes on, and those are those smaller earthquakes that sort of surround the main break. And then the Sunday morning one was particularly energetic and actually went on all day Sunday, if anybody followed it, right up to the main one, if you like, on Sunday evening.
Which was a different kind of earthquake.
It was a different kind of earthquake in that it was a sliding past earthquake, but they're all down at 10 to 20 kilometres depth. All of these earthquakes are under the sea floor at 10 to 20 kilometres depth.
Does that mean we now have two aftershock sequences?
We've basically got three aftershock sequences building up on each other, and what we'd call this is an earthquake sequence. So it's not a classic main shock aftershocks. We've actually got a sequence, but we've ended up with a, if you like, aftershock sequences stacked on aftershock sequences.
Does that increase the probability of aftershocks?
It does change that probability, and those numbers that I've given you take that into account. The really important thing is it drops off quite quickly.
Yeah, but do we have previous examples of this sort of earthquake sequence that we can look at?
So the 2005 Seddon sequence, where it was closer to Seddon. There was a few magnitude 5.5s over a period of 11 days, and in that case they come and went, and it was a very similar kind of thing. Every time you had a 5.5, you had an aftershock sequence for that. This is not unusual behaviour for the Cook Strait region.
Do we have historically back to 42? I mean, there was a big quake in 42 or 46, I think, was the last significant. In
that area, there was...
in Wellington.
In Wellington, I don't know where that was. They were in the WREMO. There was two in 1942 in the WREMO, so that's same plates, but a different part of the system.
And a different fault as well. Is this on the same fault line that Wellington itself is on?
That's a difficult interpretation. At the moment, it's in a sort of gap in the Niwa fault. If you've looked at the Niwa fault maps of Cook Strait, it's kind of like a gap over towards the South Island, and it's somewhere in that gap. So we don't have any information, and it's very hard to run the North Island and South Island faults through. It's been done for many years by various geologists, but there's no firm evidence that that's totally the case for all of the faults. So the short answer is, I don't know.
Has the level of intensity of the aftershocks diminished since the change in sequence to the different earthquake that was last night that was bigger?
It had a pretty energetic aftershock sequence for a start that's now following a pretty normal trend downwards.
So you don't sound as though you're terribly concerned that we're going to see a big one soon?
Personal question.
Well, you're the scientist.
I would say it's following about the pattern we would expect, but in the last few years I've been surprised by volcanoes, tsunami and earthquakes, so I'm very reluctant to hang my hat on something 100%, but I'd say it was following the pattern we'd expect.
Thank you, Ken, and I think Ken's message is also that we should be prepared. It could be tonight, tomorrow, or not for 10 years. The big one.
So there's another question which I think is important, and that is obviously where this is located. It scares people in Wellington, particularly because of the idea or the possibility of a tsunami.
Right.
Is that a realistic fair? I mean, if there
There's
were...
been quite a lot of work done on the potential for tsunamis generated by those faults in Cook Strait, for example, and the potential is very low. And the earthquakes have to get a lot bigger for that to be realised, sorry. The issue really is if an earthquake could trigger a landslide, and so if it happens near where there's a lot of rich sediments that you could then displace, that's a possibility, but landslide-induced tsunamis are very directed rather than the earthquake ones that cause waves or impacts over a big region. So it's low.
Just to simplify the frequency of these kind of events a little bit, I know you said it wasn't, it was quite common. Can we say it's a 1 in whatever year event? Is there a classification?
Probably several decades. You would expect, you could have as much as one like this a decade, and then you'll have a period where it might be several decades. So it's of that kind of, it's not like the Canterbury ones where it's thousands of years potentially. This is tens of years. So it's a different order.
Super.
I think we shall move on, and then I think we'll come back if people have got some scientific questions at the end. I would be very welcome to answer them. So we've actually had a team of people out looking at the external face of buildings in the central business district, and out of the many, many thousands that there are in the CBD, we think there are about 35 buildings that have sustained damage, mostly minor, mainly broken windows and cracked or broken masonry. The windows, the glass that has come down onto the footpath, that's from older style windows. It is not from the modern, recent windows. There are also a number of parking buildings that have been closed, and we'll come to that in a moment. So on Featherstone Street, which is the most concentrated area where there has been damage to the buildings, there are about a dozen buildings between Balance and Grey Streets, and that's been barriered off due to concerns about falling masonry and glass. The paramount is the safety of people who live, work or visit Wellington. Today we've seen pieces of glass and masonry still falling off those buildings at times, and we don't want to totally close Featherstone Street to pedestrians and traffic, so there have been mesh fencing, barriers, warning signs and security have been put up around those dozen buildings. Traffic is down to one lane on much of that street, and the pedestrians will have to zigzag somewhat from one side to the other to avoid being close to the buildings that may pose a danger to them. There will also be some delays. If people can use other routes, whether on foot or by vehicle, that would be the best. So, on the car parking side of things, the James Smith's car park, the Reading car park, and the car park building on the corner of Victoria and Williston Street have been closed until further notice. There has to be some further investigation about how serious any damage is there. The Westpac Stadium car parking building is also being checked out for structural damage. So there's a large number of car parking buildings, a percentage of the car parking available that is closed, so when people come into work or for the evenings and so on, they really should consider carpooling or coming in by public transport. Fran will give you a bit more of an update on the public transport situation, but it is good. I've also got an update on some of our council buildings, and it's a pleasure to note that the municipal office building is up and it'll be running all services tomorrow. 3 of the other buildings in the civic campus, the civic administration building, the library and the town hall, They're structurally fine, but they're doing some pressure testing on the sprinklers. It's all about the fire system safety, not about the building structural integrity. All of our recreation centres, community centres, swimming pools and branch libraries are all open and available for tomorrow. So that's very good news. We had some visits from people to the Wellington Regional Emergency Management Office. Many of you would have seen the Prime Minister visiting earlier today. We also had the leader of the opposition, David Shearer, together with his deputy, Grant Robertson, and also local MP, Annette King. People, all the hard-working people at the Emergency Management Office appreciated the attention that they were given, and I think that all of the politicians were impressed by the level of cooperation and knowledge and sharing of information. So there's one final fact that I want to share before I pass to Fran Wilde. And Wellington has now got its own student volunteer army. There's about 300 plus members on its Facebook page entitled Student Volunteer Army Wellington. People are offering help for clean-ups. People can connect up with that if they like, or if they prefer to approach council direct. We've still got our welfare and help number and information number 4994444. So that's it from me at the council. And Fran would like to update us on the public transport and port side of things, and then we'll take any questions to any of us.
Well, the Port have been working hard to check their infrastructure, and good news there, they will be back in business shortly. There is one vessel arriving in Wellington tonight, and they will be clearing that. They have a container crane that's been checked and is working, and so the port will be working, including, I understand, the ferry services. I'm not sure when they start though, perhaps that's tomorrow. We need to check that with Kiwi Rail. There are also clearances being done on the buildings on the ports, a couple of which have sustained water damage, which is not uncommon in other buildings in the city, and the building occupiers will be obviously dealing with that with their staff. The rail is back running. It's on a special half-hourly timetable, as I told you earlier today, and hopefully subject to no more big shakes, normal timetable as from first services tomorrow. So people coming back into the city to work, if they've been given the all clear by their employers, should be able to catch the train in as usual. Just a quick update on our own building. I've just been through it. It's very solid, I think. There's a good description from level 5 down, and so we will have to be, we'll probably be closed for one more day while we decide what to do, particularly for public access, which is of course on the ground floor. We might be asking our neighbours if there's a bit of shared space there for the public. We'll be giving some more information on that out later, and it'll be on our website too as soon as we make a decision.
And I'm sure we'll be able to share the service.
So people, you're giving the all clear for people to come back into the CBD by tomorrow?
We believe that it's safe to come in to the streets of the CBD. We've given the assurance about the levels of safety of our buildings. It will be up to people to check with their employer before they come in if they want to, if they haven't yet had any information about the safety of that building.
What would you recommend to employers? Should people be back to normal business as usual tomorrow?
I think we also have to be somewhat sympathetic to people who've had quite a big emotional shake in their lives. I think it's good to get back to normal, to get business going in the city, but there may be some people who've got some special issues that they need a little bit more sympathy with.
But is Wellington ready for business as usual tomorrow?
Wellington is open for business tomorrow, absolutely.
If the building is usable, then the business needs to make that decision.
And when do you expect those cordons to come down?
It would take some time to fix the glass and the masonry on those buildings. We don't have the times and the scale at the moment. That will be up to the building owners to get that fixed as fast as they can.
And how much pressure are you going to put on building owners, given this recent series of quakes, to make sure that their buildings are built up to earthquake standard?
Well, every encouragement. We already have assessed of the pre-1976 buildings, there have been 5,482 have been assessed already. We've got 877 to go. That's only 15% still to go. And of the ones that have been assessed, 611 fall below that 33% of building code, which is around about 10%. And some have already been strengthened. Some of the owners are working out whether to demolish or strengthen. But we have got some clear timescales about when people are expected to either strengthen or demolish.
Is it a logistical nightmare, though, to go through that process?
Well, we've had a considerable number of private buildings, the Huddart Parker building, the Majestic Tower, a number of our own ones like the City Gallery and so on strengthened. People haven't found it a barrier, and I think the market is pushing people to get their buildings strengthened. If you want to have a full office building, a profitable building, then people are demanding that it's over that 33%.
Are there any particular buildings that you're worried about?
Well, we're putting 43 million into the town hall, which is a reasonably large commitment, so we're pretty concerned that that becomes a safe and acoustically excellent building.
The council has also gone around and put a number of earthquake-prone building stickers. What's your recommendation to people who are living in these earthquake-prone buildings?
Earthquake-prone buildings, if they're residential, they generally have 15 years to strengthen those. It's a balance of risk and
What
economic.
should people living in the buildings do? Should they stay or should they go?
That's up to individuals to assess their own view of the risk.
But at
We've
the same
made it
time,
very clear that 33% is the government rules are 33% of the code is, if it's less than that, it should be demolished or strengthened, depending on its use, within 5 years, 10 years or 15 years.
but the council is responsible for putting these deciding what is an earthquake-prone building and what isn't. Doesn't the council have a responsibility to the tenants of those buildings to say whether they should stay in those buildings or whether they should go?
The information is there for people to make their judgments. It's their lives.
Where is that information? Because we struggled to find that this morning.
It should be on the front board. Two places. One, it's on the council website, but probably more relevantly for most people, it's on the front doors of buildings.
So Celia, it involves an assessment of risk though. So you know that your building is earthquake prone, and we've spoken, the GNS here has told us that there's a 19% risk of a 6 Richter scale event in the next week or something along those lines. That's still quite a high. I mean, that's like rolling a dice, and there's going to be another earthquake as big as the one on Sunday morning.
Well, if you look at how the buildings and the people and the infrastructure in Wellington came through the 6.5% earthquake, we have had 4 very minor injuries, one from a television landing on somebody. I think it shows that the city's well built and well prepared.
But I mean, the B&Z building, we know how on the waterfront here, seems to have had very extensive damage in it, and there's obviously other buildings.
I think that's water
I
damage.
think it might be water damage, but you need to...
Well, all the ceiling tiles will fall in and all
because
that.
the water actually permeates the tiles and they get soggy.
So would people not have been there if it was a work day?
So that's why we're suggesting that people contact their employers for the state of the building. It might really be structurally fine, but very wet.
Well, that's great for employers, but I mean, people in commercial buildings with employers and possibly have more access to engineers to have these things assessed. People in residential buildings might, I mean, is it perhaps not a good idea for them to go and stay with relatives for 5 days?
If that's what they choose to do, that's a good idea.
Would you stay in an earthquake-prone building at the moment?
I will be working in a yellow stickered building as I have been, and we're going to be closing.
But would you live in an earthquake-prone building? Would you sleep there the night?
Well, I have to say the hours that we work, we might
I think we're more at work more often than
It's different during the day than though at night, though, isn't it? Because you're asleep. So would you sleep in an earthquake-prone building? It's a fair question. There are people throughout the city.
Well, I would, but I don't think that what I would choose to do is what anybody else would
What
necessarily
about our
choose
chap
to
from the
do.
I
GNS?
was just going to say, can we ask the expert
Yeah.
that
I
understands
think
everything
it
about
might be
earthquakes?
useful.
Would
I
you
think-
say it might?
Would you
I
say,
think we should actually also hear from Bruce.
Well, no, we'd
Pepperell.
like to ask him a question if you don't
Yeah,
mind.
we'll
Would you
come
say?
back to the
Yeah, of
science
course.
one.
Would you say that?
I don't actually think I should be answering a personal question
Yeah.
about what I would personally do. But I am not a particularly risk-averse personality, so I would generally err on the side of the Kiwi she'll be right. So I'm not the right person to ask. But I'm not saying that as an official GNS person, so I'm covering up my logo, okay?
Were we lucky that this quake happened on a Sunday evening when people weren't in the office buildings?
Yes.
so basically, back to this assessment of risk. I mean, okay, you don't have to give us your personal opinion,
Would
but
you like to?
no, so 19% now, over the time it reduces. In 3 days' time, I imagine that probability will be what, 5%, 6%, what? Can we?
It's not a linear thing, so I can't give you a number without having it per day and having it projected. It does depend what happens with the aftershock sequence. So if you get another bigger aftershock, another 5.5 or something, that will boost it again temporarily. So it's not a question that's easy to answer. But yeah, it actually decreases in time pretty fast. But remember I said that Wellington has quite a high earthquake hazard anyway. So it doesn't go to zero, it goes to a few percent per
And
year.
The big one could happen tonight or tomorrow. You have to reduce the risk, strengthen buildings, have a family plan, all of
Yeah.
those things.
I mean, the problem with all of this is that from a public perspective is that how do they assess the risk? This is a really complex question. I mean, it's hard to explain, it's hard to understand.
Well, that's why we've got red stickered buildings, yellow stickered buildings, and buildings that are above 33%. Let's hand over to Bruce.
Yeah,
Pepperell.
look, people
Could
deal
we
with
do
risk
something
every
about the
day.
bikes?
If you drive your car, if you cross your road, there's a risk associated with that. Look, we're very mindful that we've only had 4 minor casualties, and so we believe safety is paramount, and we're taking the very cautious approach to bringing the city back to normal business. I think we can be sure that we're very keen that we get a good outcome from this. Look, we can't say that the risk is this or what it's going to be tomorrow, but people live with risk all the time.
Have we got enough engineers to check all the buildings now?
Yes, we do. We have a number of council engineers, council consultants who've been looking at council buildings. We encourage building owners to contract their own structural engineers. We have had offers from around the country if there are too many requests for the number that are in Wellington, both from the region and from as far as Auckland and Christchurch.
And do you expect every commercial building owner to check now? With an
If there's no visible, Bruce may add to this, but if there's no visible visible signs of damage, there's no reason to believe that there is structural damage. I'll go to Bruce and then I think we might ramp up.
Look, I think we've learned a lot of lessons from the Christchurch situation, but it must be remembered this is not a Christchurch situation. You've just heard the figures here. We're talking about something which is a much lower risk than what occurred down here, totally different movements. And as I said before, look, we're erring on the side of caution. We want to ensure that the city gets back to business, but with people having the confidence to sort of go at their own pace.
And to conclude, Wellington's buildings are built stronger. We've been preparing for an event for years. We've been working with GNS and we believe that the city is resilient and strong and that people should continue to do business, live and visit Wellington.
Can I just ask the scientist one question? When the difference between the Christchurch earthquake and the Wellington one last night, one went like that and the other was what? Or up and down?
Yeah, no, it wasn't that. It wasn't really that. It was just this percentage of the force of gravity that the maximum accelerations got to. In other words, the maximum shaking got to. It was kind of like 10% as large as the February earthquake. In the
What do you mean 10%
CBD.
is large? Larger or?
No, 10%
is
off, so one tenth. So,
Why was that?
because it was more like a comparison with the Darfield earthquake in September, whereas it was 30, 40 kilometres away, whereas the Christchurch earthquake of February the 22nd was almost right under the CBD. So that's the...
So I think we actually, I think we've had one last question and then that will do, and if people want to follow up individually, they can.
just like the economic impact, is there any estimates around that yet? You're saying maybe some reduced car parks, businesses in CBD might suffer from this a little bit?
Well, obviously, there've been people away from business and away from shopping today. We're encouraging, as long as the building owners encourage you back in, we're encouraging employers, visitors, shoppers to come back. Wellington's open for business tomorrow.
But how many millions might the city lose from this?
We don't have any estimates at the moment.
Do we have any EQC
So I said
claims?
that was the last question.
claims?
So
Do we have any EQC claims information?
I'm sure that there's certainly been phone calls to EQC already. I have no idea about the quantum of those yet.
Ladies and gents, there'll be another briefing at 9 o'clock tomorrow.